Evening and welcome once again to Gaming Under the Influence. I'm Mike here with Alex, coming to you from GreenDragonCVR in Woodbridge to talk about video games. How are you, man?
Doing well, man. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well too. On to Dark Souls 3 this week.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
This guy's pushing on.
You're in the midst of one.
I'm still in the middle of one, yes. I just finished the hardest boss I've had to face at this point. And yeah, it was brutal. But holy cow. Ornstein and Small, the big fatty and the skinny agile guy.
Yeah.
But like always,
a few of those.
We pushed through it. Yeah. I did it. I made it through.
You persevered.
Yeah, I'm on the other side. So
came back with
if I can do it, anyone can. If you're listening to this, you can do it too.
In the midst of that experience, we came up with a few tips.
Yeah.
That might be of help to Souls-like players. Maybe it's their first rodeo and they're struggling through exactly the same scenario.
Maybe not even, and you're just still struggling either way.
Yeah.
All
I
possible.
think that, just like anything else, any other kind of medium, there's a literacy involved in playing games in general, but in playing these games especially.
Yeah, more of a specific literacy, if you will, I guess.
And if the Souls-like genre is a coherent thing, that the different instances of it share something between themselves, and I think it really is, then it's possible for us to provide some general suggestions for Souls-like players. 2023, if you're gonna, at the end of 2023, that is,
right at the finish line. Here we are.
Whether you're looking to get into the genre, or even if you're like me, after my first couple of Dark Souls games where I didn't really engage with the systems, I summoned for every boss, and I didn't learn anything, essentially, going through it the first couple of times. And if you're interested in instead playing the game on your own as it's intended to be played, these tips might be useful for you.
Yep.
And what's the first one, man?
In my opinion, the most important thing before you even pick up a controller is just getting your head in like the right frame of mind to play this kind of game.
The first thing, is mindset. That's what you need.
Very, very different and very difficult compared to probably most any other game you've ever played. It's not going to reward you right away or even feel like it will at all. You're going to die over and over. You have to kind of understand the loop that's going to be happening here. You're going to lose a lot of souls. You're going to get frustrated quite often, and the main important thing is to understand that that's all part of the process, and to not get frustrated or get mad, but still pick up the controller and keep pushing through, right?
Yeah.
Even sometimes I've had slogs in the beginning of Bloodborne, for example, and other Souls games where the first section takes you 6 hours to get through, but then once you're over on the other side, you start picking up a little bit more pace.
That's right.
Till you get stuck at a boss.
For sure.
That's the way she goes.
This is, the first thing, it's entirely subjective, right?
Yeah.
You just can't be a baby. You got to lose with grace and take something from it. And I think, you said earlier it demands a radically different mindset, and I think that's true. And the defining characteristic of that alternate mindset is that this is not about pleasure seeking,
Yeah.
We've been reared to accept that, you're playing a game, it's fun.
Like you're unwinding.
Fun, you're having fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun, right?
Yeah.
Man, simple enjoyment, should be clear, is not the point of these games.
No. Yeah.
Or of, I would argue, any kind of artistic representation in general. It can be a good consequence of it, and it surely is, of these games. When you persevere and punch through that wall, boy, does it feel good.
It does.
It really does feel good. It's euphoric.
Yeah.
It's just to say there is fun to be had, but the end of them and the purpose of it and the entire experience is not defined by that. You have to realize that your pleasure is secondary to the effort you're going to require to penetrate this representation, right?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
To get into it, there's going to be effort required, and it's worth it, but it's going to require that you look at,
you're not going to walk through it.
At play differently, at the act of playing differently, right? And dissociate that from fun in this simple and colloquial way of talking about it.
Yeah.
So, mindset. Don't be a baby.
Don't be a baby.
Fail gracefully and learn from it, right?
Yeah.
You're like the matter. You're like clay that somebody's sculpting something new out of. That's where progression takes place here. So the mindset, the most important thing.
Yeah.
And secondarily, more practical advice. After you've actually started the game up and gotten into it, you may be wondering, faced with the selection of different starting options, character classes, such as they are in this game, what do you choose? What's easier? What's more difficult? And the first thing for anybody to realize in a game like this, in a Souls-like, is that ranged is always easier. Ranged is like easy mode in these games. In a pure Souls-like without easy mode, ranged is the easy mode.
Ranged is definitely.
And that usually means magic or pyromancy or something to that effect, if the game accommodates that. But ranged is always.
And
easy.
You usually have options available whether you're doing a magic build or a strength build. Like you said, the arrows, the bow and arrows, and the crossbows need strength strength and dex stats.
So in the first place, you definitely, you know, if you want to have an easier time of these games, if it's your first time through one, you might want to pick a ranged build like a magic build, and that'll be easier overall. But any character should, like you just said, look into ranged secondary options as utility tools. You know, there is for a strength focused melee build where you do most of your damage with a hand weapon, you should still carry a crossbow in your left hand that you can pull out if you need to do chip damage against an enemy. And the reason is, you know, the reason why ranged is easier in this game, we're gonna talk about this more soon, but it's because these games, you know, they're what we'd call frame-based action combat games. You take and receive damage based on whether the animation of your character or the enemy actually contact one another. So you can imagine if you're closer to somebody, there's more chances for them to hit you, right? Like, whereas if you're a ranged character, all you have to do is kite them. You just got to keep distance. There's no like learning exactly when they're going to swing at you and dodging at the appropriate time. Instead, you just constantly maintain distance.
You just walk backwards and sort of fire away at them, and then if you need to go in for one hit, boom, finish them off or whatever. It just makes everything so much easier, right? You don't really have to block or dodge as much. As much. There, of course, sometimes they'll have ranged attacks of their own. They'll charge at you. You'll still have to avoid them. But by and large, you know, compared to if you're right up against them and they're swinging at you and have to artfully dodge each of their swings, you don't have to do that here. And that's for a pure ranged build. But even if you're a strength character, you should still carry a ranged tool. And maybe you don't deliver maximum damage that way, but supposing you're fighting a boss and he's right at the end of his health bar, and he's got some moves that are difficult to dodge, and you're committing to an attack with melee would potentially result in you dying, you can just stay back and just snipe him a couple of times in the fight that way. It can save you.
It can.
Or in a dire situation.
Exactly. That's the most important scenario, but you know, there's other cases where you might want to kite an enemy out of a large group of enemies, and you do that with a ranged attack, right? You might want to knock somebody off a ledge. You can do that with a ranged attack. You might want to break an explodable pot or a poison pot in the environment so you don't take damage from it. You can do that. So always carry a ranged weapon and consider a ranged build if you want to have an easier time with the game. Ranged is easy, you know? And third, I think it's important to plan your build. To conceive in advance what kind of character you want to play in one of these games, because even if you can respec, it's never easy and it's never cheap.
Exactly. That's the thing. There's a big barrier in front of you if you have to respec. So the easier thing would be to just understand that you can't pump stat points into every stat. There's no jack of all trades. You need to sort of focus on what you want to do, whether it's you know, strength, dexterity, depending on the weapons you're using, or magic build, putting points into magic stats, and you figure out your weapon, which corresponding stat is what's it called?
Which one is the damage stat, the relevant damage, because they're scaling. Yeah, we should explain this.
The scaling, that's what I was going for. But
under plan your build, the first thing you do is you pick your weapon. You see which stat that damage scales with on that weapon, and then you pump that stat to soft cap to 40. And then you do endurance and health.
Health to your liking.
I think this means in practice, what you want to do in these games is stack your damage stat to what's called the soft cap. And the soft cap is the point where you start seeing diminishing returns for buying that stat. Usually that's 40. That's 40 in the damage stat.
So if your damage stat is 100 and you're putting in points and it's going up by 2 or 3 every time, and then eventually it'll cut off and start only increasing by 1.
Usually it's or not at all, like unless you buy 3 levels, right? So usually that's 40. I'd say as a rule of thumb in any Souls-like game, even the, you know, whether they're the FromSoft ones or even Hellpoint or something like this, shoot to get your damage stat to 40
to soft cap
as fast as possible. And
because then you're doing as much damage as you possibly can at every point in the game,
it much easier. If you go for the soft cap for your damage, try and get your endurance to 30 or a little under the soft cap, and then do health to comfort level, and that's it. Next, I think this is probably the most important out of all of the tips we could possibly give anybody going into these games, and that's that this is in some ways a rhythm game. You know, it's a rhythm game. And what we mean by that is each of your attacks, as well as your dodge, every action you perform takes a certain amount of time. You know, it's frame-based. You hit the button and your character performs an animation. And this game is all about lining up those animations with opportunities that the enemy affords you between their animations. Between their attacks, you got to slot in your attacks. And if you misalign that window, you're going to take damage.
You're going to take damage, right? Exactly.
So it's a rhythm game, first and foremost. You got to understand that. The fights consist in the enemy performing attack patterns rhythmic attack patterns. You got to learn those, and in between there, slot in your own.
Yeah.
So the thing you got to do in the first place is learn the rhythm of your own actions. Learn the timing of your own actions. Press the button and see how long it takes for that action to come out.
Yeah, even what I noticed in my last playthrough of Dark Souls 1 now is that when I'm doing a swing and then I was mashing the dodge button and to try and see which weapon had a longer animation, so then I switched to a sword because it had a shorter one. Anyway, basically, learn the animations and figure out which one suits your playstyle more well or whatever. If you want to be fast or if you want to be slow and do a ton of damage, but
you got to understand what's
going on.
And that's why it's also important to stick to a weapon and intimately get to understand the timings of the attacks, especially the dodge. You got to each Souls game, all the Dark Souls games, Sekiro, Bloodborne, Eliza P that I just played this year, all of them, they have a different rhythm on the dodge button, a different interval between when you press the button and when the dodge comes out. And Eliza P, it's super fast. It's like quick, within a half second. But Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 1, it's much slower. It's
doesn't feel instant.
No.
Takes your character some time to within fractions of a second. But you can feel it, right?
You definitely can. You can feel it. It's like music, right? You have to understand that interval, especially in the dodge, so that you understand when to react to an attack, right? And sometimes if the interval is, I find if the interval is more spaced out, it's easier to implement it, but you have to know in advance when the attack is coming.
Yeah.
Whereas if the window is shorter, like in Liza P, you can be more reactive, although it's harder to react because the timing is shorter. So there's a bit of a trade-off in each scenario, but whatever it's like in that game, it's imperative that you first learn the rhythm of the dodge and second of your own attacks, because that's what you're going to be throwing into the boss fights, right? You're going to be responding to the enemy's attacks with your dodges, and you're going to need to, between the enemy's attacks, put in your own attacks. So you have to understand when you press the button how long it takes for the attack to come out, and then, like you just said, how long you're locked into the animation.
And then know that you'll have time to dodge out or back out right away. 'Cause sometimes, your attack will be within a split second of them attacking you, and you only have time to get in your attack and then dodge out right away as they're like swinging at you.
You gotta know if you do anyway.
Yeah, right? And you sometimes are getting into iframes territory. It's tight, right? It's
that's the whole game. That's the whole thing. Like slotting those rhythms together, right?
And then understanding about healing too, when to do it.
Healing has its own rhythms, of course, too. And in some of the games, it's slower or faster. It's different effects, right? So you definitely have to. Those are the three big ones. Thank you for mentioning that too. The rhythm of your input for your dodge relative to when the animation comes out, the melee attacks, and your heal. You need to use all three of those ingredients. That's the ingredients of you performing well in this game. And it all costs
stamina, which is why you need to pump stamina no matter what your build is.
That's right. Everybody needs stamina. The one thing everybody needs. For sure. So learn the rhythm of those. Of course, you're going to have to learn the rhythm of the enemies as you meet them, but you need to immediately, as soon as you start the game, learn the rhythm of your own character. And stuff like this. For sure, that's right. Next, this is a bit more specific, but I think it applies again in every Soulslike game I've ever played. Man, you have to stick close to the bosses, hug the bosses. You know, you don't want to, as might seem appropriate when you first start, try and back away from guys as they're attacking you. Giant enemies, like your intuition tells you to like run away from them.
Stay far away. You're wrong. That's the wrong instinct to go off of, because more often than not they'll have some way to lunge at you or circumvent you, like jump over at you and then do like some serious damage. Whereas
they can always close a gap.
Exactly. They can close the gap on you fairly easily. Whereas if you stay close to them, or even in some cases like right underneath them, a lot of times
hug them. Hug them.
As close as possible. They don't do damage just by like touching them.
No.
Unless something. Is there any bosses that are like on fire?
Sometimes, but just as such, touching something doesn't do damage in these games. So
exactly,
the rule of thumb when you're entering a boss arena is get right up close to the boss, because when they swing at you, the likelihood is when you're right up close to them, their attack is not going to hit.
They're going to miss.
They're going to need to do a special attack that's designed to hit close to them for that to happen. And on top of that, in the first couple of Dark Souls games, like the enemies, they don't track you. If they track you at all, they do so very slowly. So you can actually, if you're close to them, simply circle them. Locked on or not locked on, just circle them. And most of their attacks will miss you. Most of their attacks. Unless you get to bosses like Artorias and Gwyn in Dark Souls 1, where they have like lots of fast sword strikes. So in the middle of a combo, they might turn around and look at you.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it doesn't happen.
Most of the time they won't do it. A lot of times you can just stick up to them and even just get consistent swings in.
Yeah.
And the only thing you have to watch out for is like an AoE area of effect attack where they, let's say, pound on the ground.
Yeah,
and
that's how they implement that precisely to deal with players doing this, I'm sure, right?
Yeah,
so most
'cause it's
bosses do.
effective, yeah.
Most bosses do have an AoE to punish you for just hugging them. So you got to watch out for that, of course.
Yeah.
But as a general rule, this is how you get through the fights, man. You stick right up to the boss, you strafe out of the way of most of their attacks, and you just pummel them when in between their own combos.
I feel like in Dark Souls 3 they test you right away on that, because that first boss that transforms halfway through, you instantly think, oh my god, I gotta get away from this thing. But he has a long reach, and if you get in close, he can't really hit you as well. You just
walk
smash him. Yeah, exactly. A lot of times that too, just being behind them will be almost guaranteed success. Get as much damage as you can while you have the opportunities, and back away if you have to. Right?
Very rarely, I think you can just stay right up close to guys and watch out for the attacks they have that are designed to hit you specifically from there. But most of the time, that's the safest place.
Most of the time, you're good. Yeah.
So try that out. If you're stuck on a boss and you've been
sounds crazy and scary, but you just gotta
right up
get in there.
And it helps to circle around them from the opposite side of the weapon they're hitting you with.
True. Yes, that's right. Yes. If they're holding a weapon in their right hand, you kind of go into that side, right?
Yeah. Like if they're swinging it with the right and you're circling left, then likelihood is they'll overshoot you.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Sort of the opposite direction of their.
I think those are really the most practical bits of advice you can give anybody starting out a Souls-like game. But there's one last thing, and I don't know if this is so much a tip as just something about playing these games and that everybody probably already assumes. But it's that use a wiki, man. And ask for help.
Don't be afraid to seek help or go online if you're not sure where to go. Obviously you can find all kinds of information, wikis, and
that's right.
I use them just to really figure out where to go, right? Like where your next stop is, or what, even just in Demon Souls to get a game progress route, so you kind of see exactly, and you don't have to follow it to a T, but it kind of gives you a general direction.
Tells you what can be done and where you can go.
I know there's the argument that people sometimes want to play games like totally dry, and that's okay too, but it almost feels like these games were meant to have that kind of social interaction, whether it be online or with a friend or somebody or whatever.
I mean, they have the ability to put messages for people in the actual game, so of course they were. But it's a wiki based, man. These games grew up with wikis surrounding them from the very first day, right?
Most people, it would be very difficult to figure out where you're going every time,
or how to complete a quest,
or how to complete a quest when you're not following something, right?
I find even for myself, when I'm playing through an area that's a little bit elaborate, I always just look up where the bonfires are in relation to each other before I just mindlessly run through it.
Because then that'll help you save time, which is a big thing in these games, because you already are wasting a ton of time.
I don't find that the actual act of walking through a path is the enthralling part about exploring the world. It's seeing the sights and stuff like that there, and you don't see those by investigating the linear drawn route between the bonfires. So
fair enough.
I think, and this goes towards mitigating the frustration you might feel in traversing a difficult level. Like don't feel like that you have to go up against these tedious parts without circumventing them naturally, right? You're not breaking the inner logic of the game by using other people's knowledge to get through it. It's not cheating.
No, of course not.
The game is still itself. This is external to it, right?
And it's still going to be hard.
It is.
You're still going to struggle, even if you know where you're going.
You position yourself with knowledge to overcome those difficulties better, right?
True.
It's not that that's how the game is built, and I think that people shouldn't be afraid of doing that. My enjoyment of these titles is immeasurably enhanced by not being lost. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I like that. Yeah. Not being lost. That's a good way to play a Souls game.
Yeah, that is a good way.
You got enough barriers in front of you. Why do you want to add another one?
No, I lose everything. No, it's not. I'm not into that. Yeah. I'm not into that at all. But that's having gotten through a couple of these, and as you're playing them right now, I think that's some advice we can offer people on some actual concrete tips on how to play Souls-like games at the end of 2023, taking into account what the genre encompasses now.
Yeah, it's valid for, I would say, all the games. A little bit more loose on the Sekiro stuff.
Maybe not Sekiro. Maybe not Remnant, where there's everybody's a range build. Maybe, those are outlying cases and less
but otherwise,
orthodox Souls-likes.
All good things to keep in mind, whether you're starting a new game for the first time or just playing a Souls game again. They're some of the best games out there, and I would encourage you to do so if you haven't.
Let us know which ones you're playing, and we'll talk to you soon.
Oh yeah.